Cadet Sale then received the training case file on a Tuesday morning in her third year of signals intelligence study, and her supervisor, Senior Analyst Core Dresch, handed it to her with a single instruction: read it completely in order and tell me what went wrong. Sale had been given 37 training case files in 3 years, and the instruction had always been the same: read it completely in order. Tell me what went wrong. Each file was a documented signals intelligence failure, selected from the Solvar taxonomy's incident archive, chosen for what it illustrated about the ways careful, experienced analysts could misread a signal and what the misreading produced in practice. The files were not classified as embarrassments, exactly, though some of them were clearly embarrassing. They were classified as instructional materials. This one was classified as instructional material with a secondary notation she had not seen before. The notation read, "Outcome contested, see Inquiry Addendum." She noted the notation and opened the file. The case was designated Incident Reference 4417K, the originating incident dated to approximately 9 years earlier. The incident category was listed as Signals Misclassification, Emergency Response Activation. She had read 7 cases in the Signals Misclassification category. All of them had been straightforward in their structure. A signal received, a classification made, the classification was wrong, the error was traced to a specific analytical gap or equipment limitation or cultural assumption. The gap or limitation or assumption was corrected and integrated into the taxonomy. The file was closed. She expected 4417K to follow the same structure. She was 3 pages into the original intercept documentation before she understood it would not. The Solvar Signals Intelligence Division's Outer Corridor Monitoring Array had first recorded the signal from the Kepler 442 human settlement on a day 43 years before the incident, and had classified it, at that initial recording, as a routine unaffiliated broadcast, the standard designation for signals that originated from a known inhabited system, but did not match any active communication protocol the array was currently monitoring. The signal had 3 components. The first was a prime number sequence, clean and precisely structured, the kind of mathematical identifier that every signal's taxonomy recognized as a deliberate intelligence marker regardless of species of origin. The second was a coordinate reference, the transmitting system's precise location, expressed in a notation system. The Solvar's translation algorithms had resolved within the signal's first 4 cycles. The third component was an audio broadcast, continuous, running for approximately 22 minutes on each transmission, whose precise frequency characteristics the array had recorded and logged without fully analyzing at the initial detection. The signal repeated annually, same date, same duration, same 3 components. For 37 years, the Outer Corridor Array's automated monitoring system had received the signal, logged the reception, confirmed the classification as routine unaffiliated broadcast, and moved on, because the signal showed no variation, prompted no response requirement under the current monitoring protocols, and generated no analytical flag that would bring it to a human analyst's attention. On the 38th year, the array's automated frequency analysis system completed a background taxonomy cross-reference on all stored signal records that it had been running at low computational priority for several years, and it flagged the Kepler 442 signals audio component for analyst review. The flag was specific. The audio component's frequency characteristics produced a consistent, high-confidence match to the Solvar Signals taxonomy's Category 7 indicators. Category 7 was the classification for biological distress signals. Sale read the flag twice. She pulled up the taxonomy's Category 7 definition and read it twice as well. The Category 7 classification covered signals that contained acoustic frequency patterns consistent with elevated biological stress response, sustained urgency markers, and high-amplitude emotional intensity sustained across the full duration of the transmission. The taxonomy's description of the specific patterns was technical, but the summary was plain. Signals that sounded, at the frequency level, like a species under significant distress. The Kepler 442 signal's audio component matched Category 7, with a confidence rating of 91%. The confidence rating for a distress classification was considered actionable at 80%. Sale turned the page to find the analyst's notes from the initial review. The analyst who had first reviewed the flag was Senior Analyst Ten Vale, who was listed in the case documentation as having 41 years of active signals experience. At the time of the review. The notes were long, detailed, and written with the specific thoroughness of someone who understood that a 41% annual repeated signal with a 91% distress match was not a routine case. Ten Vale's analysis notes read, in the relevant section, the signal has been received and logged for 38 consecutive years on the same calendar date, with no variation in any of the three components across any of the 38 recorded instances. The prime number sequence and coordinate reference are consistent with a deliberate first contact protocol, which is not consistent with a standard distress call. However, the audio component's Category 7 match is high confidence and persistent across all 38 recordings, which is also not consistent with a routine broadcast. The notes continued. I want to flag what I consider the most concerning element of this signal's characteristics. A species broadcasting a Category 7 frequency pattern once per year, on a consistent annual schedule, for 38 consecutive years, without variation, and without any apparent response from outside their own system, presents a specific profile that I do not have a clean category for. The annual scheduling is inconsistent with an acute emergency, which would not wait for calendar intervals. It is consistent, however, with a community that has been in a sustained, long-term distress situation and has been sending regular signals on the assumption that someone will eventually receive and respond to them. Sale stopped reading. She sat with that paragraph for a long moment. She had read 37 training cases. She had never read analyst notes that used the phrase, "I do not have a clean category for this." She turned the page. The notes continued. My recommendation is emergency response activation under Protocol 7C, which covers signals with ambiguous origin characteristics but high-confidence distress markers. I am aware that the first contact protocol elements create ambiguity. I am also aware that if this signal represents a community that has been in genuine sustained distress for 38 years, and we have failed to respond because the signal's mathematical components created hesitation, the failure will be significant. I am recommending activation on the basis that the cost of responding to a signal that turns out not to be a distress call is lower than the cost of failing to respond to one that is. The recommendation was approved by 3 senior oversight officers within 6 hours. Sale noted the approval timeline, 6 hours, for a Protocol 7C activation, which was not a small decision. She turned to the next section of the file. The Solve Our Signals Intelligence Division's emergency response under Protocol 7C had included a transit fleet of 6 vessels, a full medical complement, emergency supply provisions rated for a community in sustained distress conditions, and a communications team whose pre-mission briefing documentation Sale found in Section 4 of the case file and read carefully. The pre-mission briefing was thorough and grim. The briefing team had reviewed all 38 signal recordings, confirmed the Category 7 analysis, and prepared the response fleet for the specific situation that 38 years of repeated distress signals implied. A community that had been in serious difficulty for a very long time, that had been broadcasting for rescue without receiving any response, and that might, by this point, be in a condition significantly worse than the most recent signal's frequency characteristics indicated. The briefing's final section addressed the psychological preparation for the contact team. It read, "Personnel should be prepared for the possibility that the community's condition at contact will be significantly deteriorated from what we can assess remotely. A species that has been broadcasting emergency signals for 38 years without response has been in a condition of sustained hope without confirmation for a period that exceeds most standard psychological resilience frameworks. Contact personnel should prioritize establishing trust and providing immediate material support before attempting to assess the full scope of what assistance is required." Sale set the briefing document down for a moment. She thought about what the contact team had prepared themselves to find: 38 years of distress, a community that had kept broadcasting because there was nothing else to do, personnel preparing themselves psychologically for what that might look like when the door finally opened. She picked the file up again and turned to the contact log. The rescue fleet's first contact with the Kepler 442 settlement was logged at 8:47 station time on the mission's fourth day, transmitted from the fleet commander's vessel as the fleet entered communication range of the settlement's primary broadcast array. Fleet Commander Ren Soval's opening transmission followed the standard Protocol 7C contact format: formal, clear, and designed to communicate immediate availability of assistance without creating additional alarm in a community already in distress. The transmission read, "Kepler, Settlement, this is Solvar Signals Intelligence Fleet Commander Ren Soval, responding to your broadcast signal. We have received your transmissions and we are here to provide assistance. Please confirm your current status and your most immediate needs so we can prioritize our response appropriately." The settlement's response came back in 23 seconds. Sale read the response 3 times. The settlement's communications coordinator's voice, as transcribed in the contact log, carried a quality the transcription notation system had flagged as requiring contextual clarification, because the notation system's standard emotional register categories did not cleanly accommodate what it was hearing. The coordinator said, "You're here, you actually came. I need to ask you something first. Did you receive all 43, or just the most recent?" The contact log recorded a 12-second gap before Fleet Commander Soval responded. Sale noted the gap. In her 3 years of studying signals intelligence case files, she had never seen a 12-second gap in a Protocol 7C contact exchange. Protocol 7C contact exchanges were built around immediate response timing because hesitation during first contact with a distressed community created additional psychological harm. Commander Soval responded, "We have received multiple instances of your signal across a number of years. We are here to assist. Please confirm your current status." The settlement's coordinator responded, "Oh, we're wonderful, thank you. We've been transmitting every founding day for 43 years. We were starting to think the frequency range might be wrong, but we wanted to give it a fair trial. Is the rest of the fleet behind you? How many ships came?" Another gap in the contact log. This one was 17 seconds. Commander Soval responded, "Please confirm. Your community is not currently in a crisis situation." The coordinator responded, "A crisis? No. We're having our founding day celebration right now, actually. We've been in the middle of the ceremony when you came over the array. Dr. Reyes is going to be so pleased. She's been the one insisting we keep the broadcast going every year." Sale closed the contact log section and sat in the particular quiet of a cadet who has just understood that the 37 training case files she studied before this one had not fully prepared her for this one. She found the explanation in Section 6 of the case file, in a transcript of a conversation between Fleet Commander Soval and the settlement's founding council elder, conducted 2 hours after initial contact on the mission's 4th day. The elder's name was Dr. Clara Reyes, 81 years old, the settlement's original founding coordinator and the person who had, according to the settlement's own records, proposed the Founding Day broadcast 43 years earlier. Soville had asked, with the careful, professional evenness of an officer who had spent 2 hours recalibrating everything she had prepared for this mission. Can you explain what the broadcast is and why you've been transmitting it? Dr. Reyes had said, "Of course. Sit down, please. This is going to take a few minutes and I'd rather not rush it." Soville had sat down. Dr. Reyes said, "When we founded this settlement 43 years ago, we chose this location partly for the practical reasons: stable star, good orbital conditions. The geological survey was favorable, and partly because of the frequency window. Are you familiar with what humans call the contact window?" Soville said she was not. Dr. Reyes said, "It comes from very early human work in signals theory, centuries ago, when we were still confined to our home system and wondering if anyone else was out there. The contact window is a specific range of frequencies that early human signals researchers identified as the most likely range for deliberate interstellar contact, based on the physics of the frequencies themselves. They travel cleanly across long distances. They're not easily confused with natural radio sources. They have the kind of characteristics that an intelligent species trying to reach other intelligent species would naturally gravitate toward. We chose this location in part because it gives us a clear broadcast window in exactly that frequency range." Soville asked, "You chose this settlement location to facilitate first contact broadcasting?" Dr. Reyes said, "We chose it for many reasons, but yes, that was one of them. My generation grew up knowing there were other species out there. We'd had confirmed contact by then, but knowing contact existed and having it for ourselves are different things. We wanted to reach. So we built the broadcast into the foo. Ending from the beginning. Every founding day, same signal, same frequency range, same duration. The prime sequence identifies us as intelligent. The coordinates tell you where we are. The music is from our founding ceremony, the piece our community played on the day we arrived." Soville was quiet for a moment before asking, "The music?" Dr. Reyes said, "A symphony. Our settlement's founding symphony. We've played it at every Founding Day celebration for 43 years. The recording we broadcast is from the first performance." Soville said, "Our signals taxonomy classified the audio component of your broadcast as a Category 7 biological distress indicator. High confidence. That classification is what prompted this mission." Dr. Reyes looked at her for a moment. Then she said, "It's a celebration." Soville said, "I understand that now." Dr. Reyes was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "What does a celebration sound like to your people?" Soville said, quieter. Dr. Reyes made a sound that the transcription system classified as laughter, and that Sale could identify as laughter even through the flat notation. And she found the sound carried through the transcript in a way she had not expected, warm and specific. The laughter of a woman in her 80s who had just learned something surprising about the species that had come to rescue her Founding Day party. The signals team's technical analysis of the audio component, included in Section 7, was the part of the file that Sale found herself returning to most often. The analysis was conducted by a 3-person team over 5 days following the initial contact, and it was thorough in the particular way of people who had been wrong in a professionally significant way, and needed to understand exactly how they had been wrong so they could be precise about it in the documentation. The analysis found the following: human celebratory music, at peak emotional expression, produced frequency patterns that shared 4 of the 7 primary Category 7 distress indicators. The 4 shared characteristics were high amplitude sustained output, irregular rhythm patterns consistent with elevated physiological arousal, frequency peaks in ranges associated with urgency communication, and complex harmonic structures associated with multi-layered information transmission. The analysis team's summary noted, with the plain language of people who had worked through something genuinely difficult. These four characteristics appear in Category 7 distress signals, because distress produces them in the species whose signals the taxonomy was built to classify. They appear in human celebratory music because peak emotional expression, whether distress or celebration, produces similar physiological arousal states, and those states produce similar frequency signatures. Our taxonomy was built to classify distress. It correctly identified the frequency signatures. It did not have access to the information that would allow it to distinguish between two different emotional states that produce the same frequencies. The analysis team's recommendation read, "We recommend the taxonomy be expanded to include a bifurcated Category 7 classification. Category 7A, distress. Category 7B, high-intensity positive emotional expression. The distinguishing characteristics between the two classifications are detailed in the attached appendix." The appendix is based substantially on the Kepler 442 signal analysis and on additional research into human music and celebratory broadcast traditions that the signals team conducted over the 5-day analysis period. The appendix was 47 pages. Sale flipped to the appendix's first page and read its opening paragraph. The appendix read, "Human music, as a signals intelligence subject, is more complex than our taxonomy was prepared to accommodate. The emotional intensity of human musical expression, particularly in communal celebratory contexts, is not easily distinguishable from distress at the frequency level without contextual information that signals taxonomy systems do not typically have access to. We are recommending a significant expansion of the Category 7 classification framework, and we are aware that this expansion is based on a mission that was, in its formal designation, a misclassification incident. We believe the taxonomy is better for the correction. We also believe, and want to note this formally in the appendix's opening, that the mission that produced the correction, whatever its official classification, found something that was worth finding." Section 8 of the case file contained the institutional response to the mission's outcome, and Sale read it with the specific attention of someone who had spent the entire file building toward this section and was now discovering it was more complicated than she expected. The Solve Our Signals Intelligence Division's Incident Review Board had convened to classify the mission's outcome and a SIG, and the incident to an appropriate administrative category. The review board's deliberations were summarized in a 12-page document that Sale found dense in the particular way of institutional documents written by people who are trying to say something uncomfortable in language that is formally comfortable. The review board's primary challenge was that the mission had produced no negative outcomes. The settlement had not been in distress. The fleet had arrived, discovered the error, spent 3 days at the settlement community's enthusiastic invitation, and returned with a 47-page appendix that significantly improved the signal's taxonomy. A mission that produced no negative outcomes was difficult to classify as a failure, even if the classification that generated it had been wrong. The review board had considered 3 classification options. The first was standard misclassification incident, the category for signals analysis errors that had caused harm or resource waste. The review board had rejected this classification because it did not accurately characterize the outcome. The second option was successful emergency response, which the review board had also rejected because there had been no emergency to respond to. The third option, which the review board had ultimately selected, was a new classification created specifically for this case: productive misclassification, a signals analysis error whose outcome produced significant taxonomy value and positive interspecies contact. Sale looked at the new classification for a long moment. She had never, in 37 prior case files, seen an incident classification created specifically for one case. She turned to the inquiry addendum, the section the notation on the file's cover had flagged. The inquiry addendum contained one document, a personal response filed by Ten Vale, the senior analyst who had originally recommended Protocol 7C activation, in response to the review board's request for her assessment of the analytical process that had led to the misclassification. The response was 3 pages. Sale read all 3 pages, and she read them again, and on the second reading she understood why the case file's cover notation had flagged this addendum as contested. The first 2 pages of Ten Vale's response addressed the analytical process in technical detail, the specific characteristics of the Category 7 flag, the confidence rating, the reasoning behind the Protocol 7C activation recommendation, the places in the analysis where different information might have produced a different classification. It was thorough and honest, and exactly the kind of analysis a senior analyst with 41 years of experience would produce when asked to account for a significant decision. The third page was different. The third page read, "I want to address something that the Incident Review Board's classification options did not fully capture. The review board has classified this incident as a productive misclassification, which I believe is accurate as a formal description of what happened. I want to note, however, that the word misclassification implies that the signal was misread in a straightforward sense, that we received a signal, incorrectly identified what it was, and the correct answer was simply different from what we found. I do not think that is fully accurate. The signal from the Kepler 442 settlement contained, at the frequency level, all the markers of sustained, long-term distress. Our taxonomy read those markers correctly. What our taxonomy could not read was the context that determined what the markers meant, that the species producing them was not in distress, but was expressing something that, when expressed at the intensity humans express it, looks identical to distress from the outside. A species broadcasting into unknown space once per year for 43 years on a first contact frequency, hoping someone will come, is that a species in distress? I believe the honest answer is, not exactly, but also not exactly not. There is something in 43 years of reaching outward, on the same frequency, on the same day with the same music that I do not have clean category for. It is not distress in the sense our taxonomy defines. It is also not the absence of longing. It is not the absence of need. It is the presence of a very specific kind of hope, the kind that keeps going past the point where a reasonable calculation would have stopped, because the reaching itself was the point, not the receiving. Our taxonomy classified the signal as distress. The classification was wrong in the technical sense. The signal was a celebration, not an emergency. The classification was not wrong in the way that matters most. The signal contained everything a distress code contains: the urgency, the persistence, the need for an answer, the refusal to stop transmitting until one arrived. It was simply aimed at a completely different kind of answer than the one we came prepared to provide. We came prepared to rescue a community in crisis. We found a community that had been waiting for us to arrive. I am not certain those are different things. I am filing this addendum because I believe the incident archive should contain both the formal classification and this assessment. The formal classification is correct. This assessment is also correct. Both things can be true at the same time, and I believe the taxonomy is better for containing both. Sale put the file down. She sat in the particular quiet of someone who has been given an assignment and has arrived at an answer that was not the assignment. She found the settlement's own account of the mission in a supplementary document at the file's end, a brief text submitted by the settlement's communications office to the Solve Our Signals Division's archive 3 months after the fleet's departure. The document was short and signed by the settlement's founding council elder, Dr. Clara Reyes. It read, "We would like to thank the Solve Our Signals team for responding to our Founding Day broadcast and for the 3 days your fleet spent here. Our community has been transmitting on the contact window frequency for 43 years, and we have always understood that we might never receive a response in any of our lifetimes. We transmitted anyway, because the reaching was the point. We understand that your fleet came because your signal system classified our music as an emergency signal. We have been discussing this among ourselves, and we want you to know that we don't find it embarrassing for either of us. Our music sounds like urgency because it is urgent, in the way that things that matter are urgent, not because something is wrong, but because something is true and you need it to be heard. You came, that is the part that matters." Dr. Reyes had added a final line, handwritten in the document's margin, which Sale could see in the file's scan as a small, careful annotation in the margin beside the typed text. It read, "Next year we're going to play something a little quieter, so your taxonomy doesn't have a heart attack again." Sale looked at the marginal note for a long moment. She found herself, for the first time in 3 years of reading Signals Intelligence training case files, laughing at a document. She filed her training report to Senior Analyst Core Dresch the following morning, and she wrote it with the particular care of someone who understands that the answer she has arrived at is not the answer the assignment seemed to be asking for, but is the right one nonetheless. The report's formal sections she completed precisely. The analysis error's specific characteristics, the taxonomy gap that had produced it, the category 7A and 7B bifurcation that the incident had generated, the procedural value of the appendix, the classification framework improvements. The report's conclusion section she wrote last, and she wrote it twice before she submitted the version she submitted. She wrote, "The assignment was to read incident reference 4417K and determine what went wrong. I have reviewed the full case file, including the inquiry addendum and the settlement's supplementary submission, and I want to report my finding precisely. The signal's classification was technically incorrect. The audio component of the Kepler 442 signal was a celebratory broadcast, not a distress signal. Category 7 was the wrong classification. I do not believe, however, that this is the correct answer to what went wrong. The signal's taxonomy had a gap. A species in 43 years of sustained hope, broadcasting on a first contact frequency, produces frequency patterns that are genuinely indistinguishable from distress at the level of analysis the taxonomy was designed to perform. The taxonomy read everything it was built to read. What it could not read was context it was not built to have. This is not a failure of the analysis. It is a description of the taxonomy's previous limits. Those limits have now been corrected." I want to note one more thing in this report. Senior Analyst Tenvale's inquiry addendum contains an observation that I believe is the most important document in this case file, including the technical analysis. She writes that the signal contained everything a distress code contains: the urgency, the persistence, the need for an answer, the refusal to stop transmitting until one arrived. She writes that it was simply aimed at a completely different kind of answer than the one the fleet came prepared to provide. I have thought about this for the past 2 days. I believe the most precise answer to the question, what went wrong, is nothing went wrong in the way the case file's formal sections describe. The taxonomy was corrected. The contact was made. The settlement received the answer to 43 years of Founding Day broadcasts, which was not the answer they had asked for in the way. They had asked for it but was nonetheless an answer. Someone had heard them and came. If anything went wrong, it is that it took 43 years. I am filing this as my formal conclusion. Nothing went wrong that was not corrected. Something went right that was not planned. Both things are in the record. I believe both things should be. She submitted the report. She sat for a moment at her terminal. in the quiet of the early morning before the Signals Division's facility had fully come to life, and she thought about a community playing a symphony on their founding day, every year, on a frequency aimed at the unknown, for 43 years. Not because they were certain anyone would come, because the reaching was the point. Because you do not stop reaching simply because the reaching has not yet produced a response, when the reaching itself is the truest thing you know how to do. She thought about 43 years of the same music, on the same day, on the same frequency, sustained across the full natural adult lifetimes of everyone who had been present at the founding and into the lifetimes of people who had been born on the settlement, and had grown up knowing that every founding day their community reached outward and waited and reached outward again. She thought about what that looked like from the outside. She thought about what it looked like from the inside. She understood, sitting in the Signals Division's quiet morning, why the taxonomy had read the signal as urgency. Because it was urgent. Because 43 years of sustained, unhurried, undefeated hope was the most urgent thing the universe contained. Because a species that would keep reaching, past the point of reasonable expectation, past the comfortable limit, past the place where a calculation of odds would have stopped them. Because the reaching was true, and the reaching mattered, and the silence on the other end did not change either of those things. That species was producing something at the frequency level that urgency was the closest word for, even if urgency was not quite the right word. The closest right word, she decided, was the word in the settlement elder's note. The reaching was the point. If this one reached somewhere the others did not, it's in the marginal note. An 81-year-old woman, at the end of a document about a rescue fleet that came to save her founding day party, suggesting that next year they'd play something a little quieter so the taxonomy didn't have a heart attack again. 43 years of broadcasting into the void, same signal, same day, same music, not because they were certain anyone would come, but because the reaching was the point, and the point didn't require certainty to be worth doing. The taxonomy classified the music as distress. The taxonomy was technically wrong. It was also not entirely wrong, because there is a kind of hope that when sustained for long enough across enough years, with enough patience and enough consistency and enough refusal to stop reaching past the point where the calculation said stop, produces exactly the frequency patterns that distress produces. Not because something is wrong, because something is true and you need it to be heard. They transmitted for 43 years. Someone finally came. The reaching worked. That was always the plan. Stay human.